Good Monday morning, everyone. As good as you can make it, I guess, after what happened yesterday. But hope you're making the best of Monday anyway. And we've got a lot to talk about after what happened in that Vikings game. We're going to have a lot of content this week to go over because we've got problems. We've got real problems. But before I start digging into all of that, and believe me, there will be some serious digging into all of that, I want to make sure that everyone who watches my videos understands something about who to blame for a 1-2 start and who to blame for the team not living up to expectations in quite some time. So, Seahawks.com, this is the official Seahawks website, lists Pete Carroll as head coach and I want to stress this, executive VP of football operations. Pete Carroll has more power on this team than just head coach. A lot of the head coaches in the NFL right now are just head coaches. They are in charge of coaching the players during the week and in games, and their power basically stops there. Pete Carroll is one of the head coaches who has more power than that. He is the executive vice president of football operations. Therefore, he has say and clout when it comes to personnel decisions that this team makes. He is involved in the process of drafting. He is involved in the process of signing free agents, retaining free agents, letting free agents go, making trades. He is not somebody who just has to play the hand that he gets dealt every year. He is dealing the hand to himself. Yes, John Schneider is the general manager, and he is part of that decision-making process. But the reality is, because Carroll is going to be ultimately in charge of coaching these guys, he likely has just as much say in personnel decisions as Schneider, if not more. So when I say that, however you want to slice it, it all comes back to Pete Carroll, that is what I'm talking about. And that is why I say this needs to be on him, and I believe it's time for him to move on. So, yesterday in my post-game stream, I said repeatedly that I believe this Seahawks team still has a good amount of talent. I think we are a talented team. I think we have good players. And most people agreed with me, but some people didn't. Some people said, no, we don't have talent. We have very weak talent. We only have one or two really talented players. We don't have any positions of strength. And they basically just believe the problem is we don't have enough good players. And I completely disagree with that take. But that's defensible. You can make an argument, but I'm sorry, you can make an argument that we just don't have enough good players to compete with some of these other NFL teams. And the Vikings and Titans are probably not even among the best teams in the league. They are closer to the middle than they are to the top. So that may be the case. It's at least arguable, but I want to stress something just in case anyone out there doesn't understand this. If this team doesn't have talent, then it is still on Pete Carroll. And if you want to blame the players for being bad, okay, that's your prerogative. I'm not going to tell you not to do that. But I just hope you understand how big of a role Carroll has in that. Some people in my chat yesterday were saying that we suck at receiver because Freddie Swain is not good enough to be a number 3. Okay? Well, Carroll was involved in the drafting of Freddie Swain. Carroll was involved in making him the number 4 receiver right behind Dwayne Eskridge so that he would be the number 3 if and when Eskridge got hurt. He's also in charge of having guys like Penny Hart and Cody Thompson on the roster who can't step up when a guy in front of them goes down. And again, this is a violent game that these people are playing, so you have to expect that players are going to get hurt. So any excuses about injuries are not going to fly here. So Carroll's the guy who brings these guys in. Carroll is the guy who has coached these guys for years in some cases, at least a year in the case of every receiver on this team except for Eskridge. And that goes back to the situation that we have. Some people say we're not talented on the offensive line. Almost everybody complains about Kyle Fuller. They say he sucks. He's the problem. Okay? Kyle Fuller was brought in by Pete Carroll in part. coached by Pete Carroll. And even if you believe that Carroll doesn't do a whole lot for this team's offense and is mostly a defensive guy, which is probably the case, he is still the head coach of this team, and he still has to bear responsibility for all of it. So Carroll brings in Kyle Fuller. Carroll puts him on the active roster. Carroll doesn't go out and get a better center than Fuller or Posick and makes it so that Fuller has a realistic opportunity to compete for the starting job because the other centers on the team aren't that much better or injured. So just understand that if you're mad at Fuller, be mad at the guy who's been there for over a decade, getting players like Kyle Fuller in situations where they have to perform for the team to do well. You can go on to players like Brandon Shell. Some people don't like Brandon Shell, and he didn't even play yesterday, so obviously I'm not blaming him for anything that happened, but some people think Brandon Shell is bad. Well, Carroll had his say in signing Brandon Shell in free agency, and Carroll had his say in not upgrading the position at right tackle this offseason because, again, he has clout and he has say in personnel decisions. And I feel like some people don't understand that. If the players are the problem because they're not talented, then Carroll needed to bring in more talented players, or he needed to develop that talent in a more effective way. And then you get onto the defense, and oh my God, there's a lot to say here. And remember, this is supposedly Carroll's side of the ball. We're not getting good pass rush through 3 games overall. You think that Carlos Dunlap is washed up. Well, Carroll made the trade to bring Dunlap in. Carroll's been coaching Dunlap for almost a calendar year. Carroll, in part, made the decision to give Dunlap a fat contract this offseason. If you think Poona Ford has regressed and isn't playing well right now, I don't know if people think that or not, but if you do, hey, Poona Ford, you gave him the money. You gave him the contract extension. You've been coaching him for, this is now year number 4. You invested all that time into him. You think Rasheem Green isn't getting it done? Pete Carroll had his say in drafting Rasheem Green. Pete Carroll coached Rasheem Green for these last several years. And Pete Carroll decided to make Rasheem Green an integral part of this team going forward instead of either cutting him or shelving him in favor of somebody with more talent. And LJ Collier, it goes quadruple for him. First round pick. You made a big investment there. Don't tell me Carroll has nothing to do with the draft picks on this team, and he can't even get on the field when people in front of him are injured. You think Benson Mayowa has no talent? Carroll signed him twice in the last 2 years. Signed him last offseason, signed him this offseason. Decided he was good enough to keep around on 2 different occasions. You think that our secondary sucks? I know everybody thinks our secondary sucks right now. Everybody wants to kill Trey Flowers, and now people are starting to kill DJ Reed. People want to kill Ugo Amadi because he sucked so bad today. People want to kill Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. Carroll brings these guys in. Carroll coaches them. Carroll uses draft picks on them. Carroll gives them money. And I know he's not the only one making these decisions, but he is part of that decision-making process. If he sees something with a player and he thinks that player is not going to work out for him, his scheme, and the way he wants to do things, then you would expect him to be able to throw himself in front of it and say, I don't think I can utilize that player. So no matter how you slice it, this is Carroll. And before we get into the ugly stuff that we're going to have to spend a lot of time on this week, unfortunately, I want to make it very clear that even if you believe this is on the players, if you believe the problem is a lack of talent, Carroll is responsible in part for bringing talent into this organization. He is not just a head coach who gets dealt a hand every year by a GM and has to go with that hand even if it's terrible. So, more videos coming later today. We're going to break this down. We're going to try to figure out what the hell's going on. We're going to try to figure out what we can do about it at this point. If anything, we're going to see what the team does this week to try to improve. But to anybody out there who maybe doesn't feel like Carroll needs to go, if you think Carroll doesn't need to go because you think our players suck, then let there be no doubt that if the players suck, then Carroll built a team full of players that suck. He did not inherit this. He is not being handed this by a GM who doesn't answer to the head coach at all. That's not how this works on this team. He is the one bringing in these players. He is part of that decision-making process. And I believe that every single decision this front office makes goes through Carroll. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you do want your head coach to have some control over the kind of team he has. And we give him more control than a lot of other teams do. But it also means that even if you think the players suck, the buck stops with him. There are no pieces left on this team that Carroll inherited from Jim Mora Jr. All those players are long, long gone. Every player on this team, every single one, was brought in under Pete Carroll's watch, with Pete Carroll having some say in the decision-making process to bring them in. Get mad at the players if you want to, but there's a guy at the top where it all starts. I'll see you guys later today. Peace out. Go Hawks. Sorry, guys. I can't see any viable excuse to not be blaming our 1 and 2 start on Pete Carroll. Let me know what you guys think down below. I'm out of here.